We are live for Shir haShirim, class number 54. Song of Songs, we are in chapter 6, verse 11. Last week we did verse 10, and I want to welcome Cliff, who's with me in the virtual studio, and whoever's watching on the YouTubes. Nice to have you. I think we have at least one viewer on Facebook. And I would like to dedicate tonight's class to my grandmother, in memory of my grandmother, Sarah Nessie Bas Penchas, whose yahrzeit was yesterday. Yahrzeit was the Shabbos, and we'll have her in mind with our learning, having in mind a refuah shlema, a complete healing for my friend Menachem Reuven ben Minya Hinda, for Chana Bas Sarah, for my sister-in-law Anina Malka Bas Hila Hinda, and Kol Chole Yisrael, all the ill people among Israel, and Kol Chole Olam, all the sick people in the world should be healed. Okay, let's learn. I'm going to bring up the text on the screen. One moment, please. That's interesting. I have to find it. The tab mysteriously somehow is not open anymore. So I got to reopen it and then share it. Okay, tab is open. Sharing it. Adding it to the stream. Okay. Let me enlarge the text. So this is the top of chapter 6. We're going to have to scroll down because I just opened it again. But I'll scroll down to get to where we were. Bear with me, okay? That's verse 6. And we had this long story here that we didn't end up reading. I usually do this before the class, but whoopsies. Verse 7, getting closer. Verse 8, getting closer. Some of you might remember these colorful notes when we did them. Verse 9. Sounds like somebody's in the studio. Verse 10. Okay, we'll review verse 10 quickly. Welcome, Menachem, to the studio. Okay, text is on the screen. And, oh, yeah, what's that? Hello, Menachem? No, nothing?
Nope, nothing.
Nothing to share. Okay, I know you're going to speak your mind when you want to. You look great.
Baruch Hashem.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a look at verse 10. We said, this was last week, we said, Mizos nishkafa kemoshochar. Who is this looking down like the morning light? And we explained that it's talking about the Jewish people in the Second Temple period, and as the temple is situated on top of the Temple Mount, this looking is described as looking down from a high place because it represents the Jewish people when they had the temple. And she's looking down, and this looking down is described as like the morning light. As Rashi explains that as the morning light, it begins dark, and then you have a little bit of light, and a little more, and a little more, and a little more, and the light grows and grows. So too the glory of the Jewish people in the Second Temple period began very low. We were vassals to Persia. We were vassals to Greece. We didn't have our own king. We had only governors that were appointed with the consent of the empire that ruled over us. So it was a very lowly, humble beginning, but then it grew mightier and mightier. We had the war of the Hasmoneans or the Maccabees against the Greeks, And eventually, little by little, we were able to push the Greeks out of our land and reinstate our independence. And even, as Rashi points out, even declare kings over ourselves, which is true that the Hasmonean family, that was a Kohanic family, it was not a family from the house of David, family of Kohanim, did eventually become Hellenized, and as a result of that, did not remain so faithful to the Torah, and they declared themselves king. And so while there is a positive there in that we had power and we had kingship, which is glorious and beautiful, it was misused. And as I mentioned last week, the commentators say that the correct path for the Jews to have taken at that time was for the Hasmoneans, the the family of Kohanim that had taken control of the land of Israel, to pass the mantle of kingship to a descendant of David and let him reign as king. In other words, kingship could have and should have been restored at this time, but it should have been restored to the house of David. However, the Hasmoneans, the Hashmonaim, they made the mistake of maintaining kingship for themselves, which was a usurping, an illegal usurping of kingship, improper usage of kingship according to the Torah, which will ultimately be their downfall, which I hope we'll discuss tonight. So that's the downside of it, which we're going to get to. But and as much as explaining the quick summary of last week, that the glory of the Second Temple period is described as rising like the morning light, beginning with a darkness, then a small bit of light, then more and more until eventually it reaches a pinnacle, and that was the kingship of the Hasmoneans. We said beautiful like the moon, pure like the sun. These are gradations of light. You have a beautiful moonlight that's it's bright, but it's not as bright as the sun, and then finally pure like the sun, that the light becomes so bright like the light of the sun. We gave some insights into why the sun and moon were chosen to have this imagery here. You could see the previous class for that. But I just thought of something now as I'm speaking that I'll share now because I didn't think of it last week. The fact that it's compared to the moon, we asked the question last week, why compared to the moon? If you compare it to the morning light, which is essentially sunlight before the ball of the sun rises up over the horizon, you just see the rays of light, and then ultimately it reaches Baruch Hachama, like a pure sunlight of the sun in its fullness in the sky, and you somehow saying that the middle degree is moonlight. Doesn't exactly make sense. If you're just talking about degrees of light, it's a little bit of light, it's a little bit more, it's a lot. So okay, morning light, moonlight, sunlight are gradations of light, but it seemed peculiar that the moon was just interrupting between two forms of sunlight. So we gave an explanation last week. You can watch that class for that. But here's what I thought of just now. I said to you now that there should have been a kingship established in the Second Temple period that was Davidic, that was from the house of David, and that would may have ushered in the final redemption, for all we know. But it didn't end up happening, right? So perhaps that's why it's compared to the moon, in as much as the moon waxes and wanes. So we have sort of the waxing of the moon. That means the growing larger of the moon as we see it grow in the sky from a crescent shape to a half moon to three quarters, and then ultimately a full moon. But then there's a waning that it shrinks back down again. And maybe this verse here is hinting to the fact that though they would reach a certain pinnacle of grandeur in the Second Temple period, it would only be like the moon waxing and waning. And though it would wax, it would also wane. Wax on, wax off, as they say. So maybe that's the reference of the moonlight. It's just another thought I had here as we were speaking. And then finally, Ayumaka Nigdalos, fearsome like army camps. When we were talking about the armies of the Hasmoneans that were feared by the Greeks and ultimately defeated the Greeks, and that represented kind of like the pinnacle of grandeur that we reached during this period was following the Hasmonean rebellion. Okay, that's about as much as we did last week, which summed up really quickly in a few minutes. And if there's any questions before we proceed with verse 11, I will hear them now. So now's your chance. Okay, speak up anytime. Next, verse 11, like this. El ginas egos yoradti liros be'ibe hanochal liros hafarecho hagefen heinetzu harimonim. That means El ginas egos yoradti. I descended to the garden of the nut. To the garden of the nut. So we have a garden. We were just talking before the broadcast about orchards in Southern California. I know that Menachem can appreciate this as well. Orchards in Southern California. There's so many fruit trees that it's very beautiful. It's very exciting. It's very uplifting. So here we have an imagery of a garden of nuts. That means essentially an orchard, if you will. Would you call it an orchard? Where nut trees grow, trees growing nuts, right? Tree nuts. So he's going to the garden of the nut. I descended to the garden of the nut. We're going to see who's speaking, who's descending, why it's described as descending. What is the garden of the nut? Lir'os bi'ibei hanochal, to see the fruits of the stream. Okay, a nachal is like a stream of water. So you imagine a stream of water flowing alongside the garden, and the garden is being watered from the stream, and it's growing fruit. Now, in this case, the fruit is the nut. The nut is the produce of this tree, which we're calling a fruit for intents and purposes. So I descended to the garden of the nut to see the fruits of the stream, to see the fruits growing on the trees that are being watered by this stream. Lir'os hafarecho hagefen, to see has the vine flowered. So here it's not only aginas egos all of a sudden, not just a garden of nuts, but we also have a vine here. And I wanted to see, has the vine flowered? Heinetzu harimonim, have the pomegranates put forth their buds. A nates is a bud. So whoever this is coming into the garden to see, the budding, the flowering of the vine, the budding of the pomegranate. We know that the flower precedes the fruit. The flower needs to be pollinated, and it produces fruit, etc. All you Southern California orchard guys know about this stuff better than me. So that's the verse. I descended to the garden of the nut to see the fruit of the stream, to see has the vine flowered, have the pomegranates budded. Okay, any questions on that translation? Okay, stop me at any time. The YouTube is also very quiet this evening. Okay, so let's take a look at Rashi here. Rashi makes the following comments. El ginas egos yoraditi, I descended to the garden of the nut. Od zemi divrei shchina. This is a continuation of the words of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. This is God speaking. Meaning, prior to this, we had the praises. Maybe I won't scroll back up, but everything in this chapter, much of the chapter, maybe not everything, much of the chapter was God's praise of Israel and his description of Israel and all the beauty. And the very last thing we saw is talking about this ascent of glory in the Second Temple period, like the morning light, like the pure light of the sun, etc., like we discussed. How's my sound, by the way? How's my audio? Is my audio okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, fine. I don't have my fancy mic today, so it's just my built-in mic. As long as you can hear me okay. So now it's telling us this continues to be the voice of God, as it were, speaking. But here there's a narrative. The praise section has ended, and now God is sort of narrating his own story. And he says that he came down to the garden of the nut. We have someone entering the studio, maybe? Oh, no, Menachem, maybe you left and you came back. We're happy to have you back. It says,
I changed devices, Rav Mallet.
I accept you. Um, so, fine. Yeah, where were we? Okay, so Rashi says this. This is God speaking. Hine vasi al mikdash sheni zeh. Behold, I came to this second temple, Elayich, to you. Here's the word, Elayich, to you. I came to you in the second temple. Lir'os be'ibei hanachal, to see. Okay, so now what you'll notice what Rashi glossed over, he's going straight to the fruit of the stream. You'll see what he glossed over is what does it mean, the garden of the nut? So I have descended, meaning God's divine presence has descended down to earth, in particular to the second temple. So what's implied here is that the second temple is the garden of the nut. Why is the second temple called the garden of the nut? Why is it compared to a nut? We shall see, which is why I colored this in this orangish color. And so this first comment is in the orangish color. And then later on, you'll see that I highlighted the later comments of Rashi in orange because he'll return to this point and clarify it. So hold on. I know you're asking, what is the garden of the nut? We will get there. Meanwhile, lir'os be'ibei hanachal, to see the fruit of the stream. Ma lachluch, says Rashi, ma lachluchis masim tovim erevach. What moisture of good deeds will I see in you? The fruit of the stream is good deeds. It's the fruit of the Jewish people in the Second Temple period. What is their fruit? Their fruit are their deeds, their good deeds, and these are the fruit of the stream, the good deeds that are watered by the stream. And so he says, what is the moisture, the fruit of the stream? What is the moisture of the good deeds that I will see in you? Now, what does exactly mean the moisture? What does it, the moisture represent? Something juicy, something substantive. We saw earlier in Shir haShirim, I don't remember the chapter and verse, where we talked about a garden and a pool of water, and all these fruit growing in the garden that are watered by this pool, and the pool represented the purity of the Jewish people, like a mikveh. Um, that's one idea, maybe hearkening back to that. But also, one of my thoughts. Well, before I say my thoughts, does anyone have any thoughts on what does it mean? What moisture of good deeds do you have? What's this idea of moisture? The fruit, I understand, is the produce, is the good deeds. What's the idea of the stream and the moisture that Rashi's bringing into it? Anyone have any thoughts on this? Yeah, Menachem, please. Menachem, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, Cliff has a thought.
Oh, yeah, it isn't much of one. Hi, Menachem. It's good to see you again.
Hey, Cliff.
Because I speak Hebrew, there's something very viscous about lichluche. Anything that has that root is referring, like you just indicated, to something that's very viscous. It's very substantial. It's something really, what's the word for it? I can't think of the right word, but it's like, you can feel it in your fingers and your hands. It's, at least in modern Hebrew.
I'm thinking capillary, action.
Yeah, it's like oil, it's
Correct.
a very kind of an oilish, there's something very luxurious about it. You know what I mean? And I don't know what that could mean, or whether that has any relevance whatsoever to this question at all. But I do know that that's the general feel that word typically had when I was speaking Hebrew, that it had that flavor to it. And I don't know, is there a maybe there is some sort of relationship to oil, Shem Tov, Keshemen Tov, that kind of thing. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
Right. We had a lot of oil references earlier, so I like what you're saying. I think we're going to unlock something. Menachem, go.
In terms of viscosity, I think when you talk when you get so detailed about the language and the beauty of the language with regards to the oil and the oil is used throughout the mizbeach, throughout all of our kabbanos. Like 9 times out of 10, it's like it's shemen. We
Right.
we we,
Flour,
we focus on
oil,
this, and
right.
that's a way to describe love, and it is also described in a way for love when we describe Moshe and Aaron, when Aaron was anointed as the Kohen, Moshe had to pour oil on him at a time which was very, very emotionally difficult for him, for everybody. And I'm wondering, Rabbi Mallet, is there any source or is there any makor with that?
So I can't claim to be so expert that I know so many sources that I could tell you whether there is or isn't, to be honest.
However, is there any basis for what I'm saying? Because oil is usually, it's described in, throughout, especially with after Aaron lost his son. It seems to be a way of anointing someone with love.
It's interesting. Well, I mean, oil has a lot to do with the Second Temple period. We had aside from just the temple imagery, but the whole Hanukkah story was with oil. The whole story of the Chashmonaim really begins with oil, and it's interesting. The word Chashmonaim is like the letter Ches, which is 8, and Shemen. It's like Ches, Shemen, Chashmonaim. They're the people of the 8 days of the oil. It's almost like in the name.
Hmm.
And a lot of what goes on in this chapter revolves around their story. And I hadn't thought of any of that. I didn't see a source like that, and I didn't personally make any connection myself to oil when I was reading these passages, especially because it's called the Nachal, the stream. You think of water, so I'm not sure that if there's any direct connection to oil, but I'm not sure that there isn't. In other words, again, we can see
So
oil is a big player in the story of the Chashmonaim.
if I do my homework, maybe I can. If I do my homework, maybe next week we could discuss it.
Yeah, open to it. So I'll tell you, between what you're saying and what Cliff is saying, the idea of sort of like the thickness of the like the viscosity, as you're saying, like lachluchis. I didn't actually pick up on that with the word lachluchis, but I'm hearing it, and it does kind of make sense that Rashi's pointing out these aren't just fruit; these are fruit of the stream. These are fruit that are robust and very healthy because of the source of water that is giving them their life. So when we talk about the deeds are more than just empty actions. There's a lot underlying them, and maybe that goes to the kavana, sort of the thought that goes into it, the intent, or perhaps the knowledge that is being expressed through action. So I want to see if that's maybe expressed in the rest of the verse, which I hadn't thought of before, but it's a nice connection to what's coming. So let's see how that goes. Okay. So he says, I wanted to see the fruit of the stream. What moisture of good deeds shall I see in you? God's looking to see the good deeds, this fruit that is moist. He says, Hafaracha hagefen, has the vine flowered? Hafaracha, from the word perach, flower. Has the vine flowered? Im tafrichu lefanai talmidei chachamim v'sofrim v'shonim. He says, I'm looking to see if there shall flower up, there shall sprout forth before me, among you Jews in the Second Temple, What am I looking up to flower up before me? Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars, Visofrim and scribes, Vishonim. Shonim literally means learners or teachers. Like we say, Vishinantam levanecha. You shall teach your son's Torah. So the Torah teachers, Torah learners, scholars, scribes. You see, these are the learned men. So it seems that the Geffen here, the grapevine, is a symbol for Torah knowledge, and God's looking for Torah knowledge. Okay. Now, what's interesting is he just said, "What are the deeds that I shall see in you?" But knowledge is not a deed. Now, you could say that learning is a deed. Learning, we say Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Learning of the Torah is equivalent to all the commandments combined, and maybe that's because there could be no fulfillment without the knowledge. But generally, we almost like segregate between the two things. There's the learning of Torah, and there's the doing. The ma'asim tovim are the good deeds. We usually separate between the deeds and the knowledge, like we just had in Sukkot. We had the four species: the esrog, the lulav, the hadassim, the myrtle, the arava, the willow, and Chazal, our sages, talk about the symbolism of the esrog. Has the citron has both a taste and a smell. We touched on this way back in class number 10. We talked about what's the tapuach that's described in Shir haShirim. Check out that class. But you have the esrog, which has a taste and a smell. You have the lulav, which comes from the date tree, and the date has a taste, but there's no remarkable smell. And you have the myrtle, which has a beautiful smell. People use it for besamim, for the spices after Havdalah, to smell the myrtle. Some people put it on the table for Shabbos, like flowers, to create a fragrance. Has a smell, but it doesn't have a taste. And then you have the willow, which has neither smell nor taste. So one has both qualities. One has this quality and not that quality. One has the other quality, but not the first quality. And one has neither quality. And what's this idea that our sages tell us the symbolism? The taste represents the Torah knowledge, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And the smell represents the deeds. I might have that reversed, but that's what I think. At least I think that's what we said in that class number 10, because the smell goes forth. Those are the deeds that come out into the world. The taste is what's inside. That's the knowledge within. So some Jews have Torah knowledge and good deeds. Some Jews have knowledge without deeds. Some Jews lack knowledge but perform many good deeds. And some Jews do neither of those things. And yet we see that we're meant to bring these four species together. We bring these four types of Jews together. We all join together to serve Hashem. Everyone's welcome. Everyone's welcome. So that's a beautiful idea that comes from the symbolism of Sukkot. So, but my point is, we seem to parse out. There's the masim tovim, they're the deeds, and then there's the knowledge. And so God says, I'm coming to see what your deeds are. And then he asks right away, do you have knowledge? Do you have Torah scholars? Do you have scribes? Do you have Torah learners, Torah teachers? So question number one, I made a footnote here. The footnote was a little question I asked of why is the vine, the grapevine, why is that the symbol for Torah wisdom, Torah knowledge, Torah learning, Torah scholarship? What do you think? Any thoughts? So I'll share with you my thought. You're welcome to interrupt me anytime. My thought was that the wine is something that improves with age. It improves with age. So too, the Torah learners, the older you get, the more learned you become, the wiser you become. So the more improved your learning becomes. So like the product of the grapevine, which is wine, that improves with age, that's the sage, the Torah sage. He's generally associated with an elderly person. We even say that when the Torah says, it says, Mipnei seva takum, you should rise for a seva, which means an old person. And hadarta pnei zaken, and you should, glorify the face of a zaken, of an elder. So isn't it kind of repetitive. Seva, old person. Zaken, elder. So we say that Zaken refers not just to a person who's old in age or has white hair, but even a young person who is a scholar in Torah is called Zaken. And that the word Zaken is an acronym. What do you call it? An acronym. It's a contraction maybe of Zeh Shekana Chachma. The one who has acquired wisdom. Zaken, Zekana. This one has acquired. It's a person who's acquired wisdom. So we associate old age and elderliness with the acquisition of Torah. And wine is something that the older it is, the finer it gets. You want to look for that bottle that has a year on it that's good and old, because then it's aged to perfection. So I thought maybe that was the comparison of the vine to Torah scholarship. It improves with age. Fine. That was just a thought. Anyone's welcome to agree, disagree. That was my thought process. So we still have the question of he's looking for the deeds, but immediately starts asking about the scholars. Now, maybe there's an obvious answer, because like we said, you can't really have deeds without scholarship. So the first thing you say is, do you have the wisdom to know what to perform? Right? So that could be an obvious way to go. Maybe we could connect it to what we said before. So let's continue. Hey, Neitzu Harimonim, have the pomegranates budded? So he says, Mekaime mitzvos meleyes chuyos. The budding of the pomegranates represents those people who fulfill the commandments. Mekaime mitzvos, they fulfill the commandments. Meleyes chuyos, and they are filled with merit. And that's an imagery we had before with the pomegranate multiple times, that God said, every Jew is even the thinnest hair and the emptiest person is filled with merits and filled with mitzvos like a pomegranate. So the pomegranates always represent an abundance of performance of mitzvos. So that fits very well with the masim tovim. I'm looking for good deeds. So where are my pomegranates? I'm looking for my pomegranates. Fine. But what's with the wine? So maybe that answers up the lachluchis, the moisture. Now I'm thinking also moisture from water, nachal, a stream, water, Torah is compared to water. So I'm looking for deeds that are not just deeds, but they're remarkable in the fact that they come with moisture. They come together with Torah scholarship, Torah learning, Torah knowledge. So a good deed is a good deed. But imagine if you understood the depth of Torah that directs us to perform this deed, and you fulfill the deed with the proper intent and the proper understanding of what you're doing, the proper meaning to the action, because you have the wisdom to understand what the meaning of that action is. So it's not just a mitzvah or a masa tov, a good deed, a performance of a commandment, but it's lachluchis, it's juicy, it's moist, it's full with the viscosity of the knowledge of the meaning of this action that comes through scholarship. So that's why he says, when I'm looking for ibei hanachal, not just fruit, but fruit of the stream, fruit that's watered, fruit that's juicy, lachluchis masim tovim, moisture in those good deeds. So he says, are you learning Torah? Hafarach hagefen? Are the Torah scholars sprouting forward? Hey, Neitzu harimonim, are the pomegranates that are full of performance of mitzvahs, that they budding? It's these two in tandem that God is looking for. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that amazing? Isn't that astounding, incredible? Mind-blowing. Okay, we're going to talk about the nut. Any comments till now? Okay, it looks like the YouTube chat is still very silent tonight. Menachem, are you able to unmute, or do I need to do it? I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
No, I just viscosity is essentially kavana.
Yeah, it's like the
mitzvah kavana. I mean, it's a basic concept, but that is what makes something juicy. You could have something, you could eat something that's dry. You could do a mitzvah that's very simple. I could put on tefillin and barot, say, al mitzvah tefillin and lahaniach tefillin every morning. or I could put some juice into it.
Right, exactly.
Juice is the kana.
You have two.
Is that where you're going, Rabbi?
I think that's what emerges. That you could have two actions that appear identical on the outside, but what's going on the inside, because you could look like, don't judge a book by its cover. This happens all the time with fruit. It's a perfect analogy because you could go to the store and you pick out the most beautiful looking fruit. It's the reddest apple, but you take a bite into it. Sometimes it's tasteless. Sometimes it's mealy. It's like, oh, it looked good, but on the inside, it doesn't taste good. And then you can have one that looks a little schwach. It looks a little, not so beautiful on the outside, but you cut it open and it's just absolutely the most delicious thing you've ever tasted. So, you can have something that looks good on the outside, but it's really the fruit juice. It's the inside of the fruit that really tells you how robust and desirable this fruit is. So that's what I think's going on, and I think you're right. So I'm gonna go now to the nut. Okay, now where she says Lama Nimshalu Yisrael Egos. Why was Israel compared to the nut? Listen to this. Ma egos zet ataroa oso kulo eitz. This nut, you look at it, and it looks like it's all wood. He's talking about the nut in the shell. You see the shell of the nut, and it looks like a piece of wood. It's not beautiful. It's not colorful. It's not tasty. You can't bite into it. It's hard, right? It looks like a piece of wood. And you cannot see what's in it. You cannot see what's in it. Potso, but if you crack it open, you find it full of chambers and chambers of food. You can even think of a peanut. It sometimes has multiple nuts inside the shell, or a walnut, or many different types of nuts. You crack the shell and you find in the shell are shelves of different pieces of the nut in there, right? So Kach Yisrael, so too Israel, Snuim, they're modest. Ve'in v'sanim b'ma'aseyam, they're humble in their deeds. Ve'in talmidim shebahem nikorim, and the talmidim, that literally means the students among them are not recognizable. I assume he means by students is students of the Torah, like the Torah scholars, like Talmidei Chacham. They're not recognizable. They're not showing off. They're not showing off. So, you don't really see what's on the inside of a Jew. Ve'in mispar and the hachras al shivchan. They don't glorify themselves to announce their praises, to announce how great they are. Look at me, I'm so amazing. It's the opposite of Western culture. It's the opposite of modern culture, of Hollywood culture, where everything is bombastic and everything is getting on stage and showing off and putting in lights and billboards and sparkly clothing, and right, everything is, look at me, look how great I am. And the way of the Jew is, I'm small, I'm humble, don't look at me, nothing to see here, just going about my business, nothing to see, right? We're like the nut. We have this shell, we're unremarkable, you don't see what's in there, doesn't look like anything desirable. Bedaktoi, but if you check closely, at the Moitzei Oisai Malei Chachma, you find he's full of wisdom. This person, he seems like a simple Jew, but you go and find he's full of wisdom. Like my friend Menachem and my friend Cliff. We get to discussions in the class, and it's unbelievable to discover how wise and sagacious my Jewish friends are. So, and then Rashi says, listen to this. Va'od kama midrashos ladavid. There are a number of midrashos, a number of homilies that are expounded from this comparison. Ma ego zen no fel batit ve'in mashe b'soiche nemos. Just like this nut, it'll fall into the mud, and what's inside of it won't become dirty, won't become disgusting, because it has that shell, right? Af Yisrael goylin levena umais. So too Israel is exiled among the nations. We're thrown into the quicksand. We're thrown into the mud pit. The loikin malkias harbe, and they're beaten many beatings. Ve'ein ma'aseyam nimasin, and their deeds do not become disgusting. We don't become divorced from the Torah on account of our our exile, on account of our persecutions, we remain righteous as always. Now, is that really so true? I don't want to say anything, but you might look around and feel like maybe that's not the case. But I think to the extent that we don't necessarily see that, maybe that's everything we're learning in Shir haShirim. Like, oh, you don't see, says Hashem, but I see. Israel's like the nut. He looks very plain on the outside, but I can see even the Jew that looks to you like maybe he's not so connected to his heritage. He's a very fine human being and he does a lot of good. And in many ways, like we said before, maybe more good than you and me. Some of these Jews who seem not to be so traditional may be in many aspects of their life doing things that please God very much, more than we are in those same areas. We can never look down and we can never go by looks. We see that from the nut. We see that from the fruit. We see that from the, the previous descriptions of behind the hair covering, etc., the thin wispy hair and the all those other comparisons. So, don't don't pass over this Rashi too quickly. Give it a lot of thought. Now, I put a footnote here because I quoted another medrash. Rashi says there's a lot of midrashes, So I looked up a little bit and I found something so beautiful. I said it must be shared. So in footnote 28, this is from Shir haShirim Rabbah, chapter 6, paragraph 11, or I really should say chapter 6, verse 11, meaning the comments of the medrash on verse 11. It says, Rabbi Azariah Amar Tarti. Rabbi Azariah said two explanations of this verse. Ma egos eitzo meshamer pirio, just like this nut, its wood, meaning its shell, guards its fruit. Kach amei haaretz b'Yisrael machzikin b'divrei Torah. So too, the amei haaretz literally means the people of the earth, but it's a euphemism for people who are unlearned. Unlearned people, there's sometimes an uncomplimentary word that's used here, ignoramus. And ignoramus is called in colloquial Hebrew an am haaretz. He's one of the people of the land. He's one of the the dumb masses, whatever you call it. But just to clean that language up, the unlearned among Israel are holding on to words of Torah like the shell guards the fruit. And that's like what we said before. You see Jews and they don't look remarkable, like these are the Talmidei Chacham and these are the Torah scholars. And like you look close and you see they're full of Torah wisdom. Even those people that we think maybe are unlearned. She says, just like Rashi said earlier, even the emptiest Jew is full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. Even the unlearned Jew, you put in quotation marks, unlearned, yeah, but unlearned for a Jew still means he knows a lot. He knows a lot of Torah, and he holds on to words of Torah. And just to clarify the comparison, he brings a verse. This is the meaning of the verse. It's a tree of life to those who hold on to it. So it sounds like the tree is the Torah, and it's a tree of life for those who hold on to it. Who holds on to it? Amei haaretz, the non-learned of Israel, or you could say even the non-learned of Israel, hold on to divrei Torah, and so therefore that tree of life, eitzo meshamer pirio, the tree is guarding the fruit. The Torah is protective over the Jewish people, even the unlearned, on quotation marks, because even the unlearned are holding on to quite a bit of divrei Torah. And not only that, you could say even further that lahachazik Torah could mean to uphold the Torah, to strengthen the Torah. And very often those who may not be scholars will nevertheless support Torah institutions. They'll support the Seattle Kollel. And like anyone who's listening to my voice right now, this class is made possible by the Seattle Kollel, www.seattlekollel.com. And if your heart moves you to make a donation, I encourage you to do so. Classes are free, and whatever you'd like to give is appreciated. But here you see that the unlearned, maybe they're not learning Torah, they don't know Torah, but they're strengthening the Torah, they're upholding the Torah, they're supporting the Torah, and as a result, the Torah protects them. Torah protects them as well. So, fine. Amar Chori. Now, it's funny because it says, Rabbi Zariah said Amar Tarte. He said two things, but I only heard one thing. And then Amar Chori said, I don't know who Chori is. Chori said, Ma ego zeh im nofel l'sochati nofes. If this, he says, this nut, if it falls into the dirt, tinofes means filth. It falls into the filth. At notlo, you can take it out. Umorko, you could scrape it off. V'shotfo, you could rinse it off. Umadicho, you could wash it off. V'hu chozer kitchilasa, and it goes back exactly to the way it was. Right back the way it was before it fell in the filth. V'hu yafel achil, and you could eat it. Right? Pick it up off the floor and eat it. Kach kol mashi Yisrael mislach lechen ba'avonos kol yamos hashana. Listen to this. Oh, it warms my heart. He says, so too, no matter how much Israel becomes dirty throughout the year with iniquity, with sin, Ba Yom HaKippurim comes Yom Kippur, u'mechaper aleim, and it atones for them. As it says, on this day, it shall atone for you to purify you. So Israel's like a nut. Israel's like a nut. We hold on to the Torah and it protects us like a shell. We fall into the dirt and we stay clean. We get dirty and we can be cleaned off and be as delicious as we were before. Very, very beautiful. Okay, any thoughts before I want to try to make a dash for the end of the for the end of the chapter? Okay, feel free to comment, question. We're going to run for the end here. Verse 12. Lo yodati nafshi samasni markivos aminadiv. She says, Lo yodati. I did not know. Nafshi samasni. My soul placed me. Markivos aminadiv. As chariots for, I'm going to translate the way Rashi translates, for the noble nation. Okay, I didn't know. My soul placed me as chariots for the noble nation. Okay, any comments? Someone have a comment? Okay. Okay. Mysterious verse. All right, now what's going on here? Feel free to stop me with questions or comments. Lo yadati, says Rashi, I did not know. Knesses Yisrael misonenes. The Jewish people is now responding to God, or she's speaking, and she's misonenes is like she's mourning. She's saying these mournful, sad, sorry words. She says, Lo yadati, I didn't know. I didn't know what? Lo yadati lihizaher men achet. I didn't know how to guard myself from sin. She'emod bechvodi uvgdulasi. So that I could remain, so I could emod, I could stand, I could remain in my glory and in my greatness. We just described, God described this incredible greatness and this incredible glory of the Jewish people in the Second Temple period. But all good things come to an end, right? We know, unfortunately, that the Second Temple period came to an unfortunate end. And here the Jewish people is lamenting. She said, I didn't know how to remain in that glorious state. I didn't know how to guard myself from sin so I wouldn't fall. V'nechshalti b'sinas chinam. And I fell. I fell in sinas chinam, in baseless hatred, in the hatred of one Jew to another, in factionalism and fragmentation, machlokes, discord, argument, disharmony. Shegavra b'malchei beis chashmonai. This grew. He says now b'malchei beis chashmonai could either mean among the kings of the house of Hashmonai, the Hasmonean dynasty, or maybe he means in the time of. But you're going to see from his comments coming that he means it was an outgrowth of the behavior of the kings of Hashmonai, which we described started out righteous and then started to lose their righteousness. What specifically is he talking about? Hyrcanus the Aristobulus. Those who know Jewish history know these names: Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. Who were Hyrcanus and Aristobulus? Okay, so last week we described it. I'll quickly try to go through it again. The dynasty of the Hasmoneans. We had the rebellion of the Jews against the Greeks, which was started by Matisyahu Hashmonai, Mattathias the Hasmonean, and his 5 sons, Yehuda, Yonasan, Shimon, Yochanan, and Elazar or Eliezer, one of those. So Yehuda was initially the leader. When he died, Yonasan, Jonathan, took over as the leader, and when he died, Shimon took over as the leader. Shimon's son, whose name was Yochanan Hyrcanus, took over the mantle of leadership after him, and it seems from our sources that Yochanan Hyrcanus began flirting with the Sadducees and may have himself, it seems, become a Sadducee. And his son, whose name was Yanai, also known as Alexander or Alexander Jannaeus, became the next leader, and he declared himself king. It's not clear if he declared himself king or Yochanan Hyrcanus declared himself king, but generally in our sources we don't have references to King Yochanan. We have references to Yanai HaMelech, King Yanai. So it seems that he's the one who took upon himself the title of king, and he had a wife named Shlomit Alexandra. Shlomit Alexandra is also known as Queen Salome, Salome. In Hebrew, she's called Shlomit Alexandra. And when Yanai dies, she becomes queen. And she was righteous. She was actually not a Sadducee. She was a Pharisee, as it were. She was a follower of the Jewish sages. And so imagine having a marriage like that. The husband's a Sadducee and the wife's a Pharisee. Be it as it may, she was also the sister of Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach was, I think, the Av Beis Din. He was the head, essentially the head of the sages. Like the chief rabbi in that period was a man named Shimon ben Shetach, and his sister was the queen. So once Yanai was out of the picture, basically she took her marching orders from her brother Shimon ben Shetach, and she did everything according to the law, and she was very righteous. However, her children were less so. She had 2 children, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. You see already the children were named Greek names. Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. Hyrcanus was the more righteous son. Aristobulus was the Sadduceic son, and let's say Hyrcanus was more on his mother's side of things. But Hyrcanus, although he was the rightful heir, she bequeathed the kingdom to him. The problem was that he was weak. He was militarily weak. He was somewhat weak of mind. And Aristobulus conspired to rebel against him and take the kingship away from him. So from Hyrcanus, it passed to Aristobulus. But Hyrcanus, who was still around, ended up getting manipulated by an Edomite, an Idumean named Antipater, Antipater, Antipater. And Antipater convinces Hyrcanus that he can take back the kingship from Aristobulus. And with Antipater's encouragement, Hyrcanus rebels back against Aristobulus and attempts to recapture the kingship over Israel. He ends up beating the forces of Aristobulus back into Jerusalem, and he besieges the city of Jerusalem. You have Aristobulus on the inside and Hyrcanus on the outside. Now, because the Jews, even the Jews who were loyal to Hyrcanus, believed that the temple service had to continue, when the siege caused that they ran out of animals to to sacrifice as for the Tamid offering. The Tamid was a korban, a sacrifice that was given twice daily, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. When they ran out of sacrifices, so they said to the Jews on the other side of the wall, "We need animals. We need to bring a sacrifice. It's your temple too. It's your religion too." So they would raise up over the wall every day. They would put a like a lamb in a basket, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, with a little whatever they call a rope pulley, and they would raise up this over the wall this lamb, and they would put it on the altar twice a day. As the siege was raging on, the Jews are trying to figure out, the forces of Hyrcanus are trying to figure out how do we break in. They realized that the merit of the temple service was protecting them. So they said, we have to stop providing them with the lamb. So one day, instead of putting a lamb on the pulley, they put a pig. And when they pulled up the pulley and a pig came up, they knew the game was over. And this is actually one of the 5 tragedies that I think we commemorate on the 17th of Tammuz. It says, Butla HaTamid. The Tamid offering was nullified. This was the day that they raised the pig with the pulley, and there was no more Tamid offering brought in the temple. Now, Aristobulus, really realizing he was going to be defeated by Hyrcanus, calls the Roman Empire and says, "Will you please come and help me?" And because of his invitation, the Romans enter the land of Israel, and immediately a battle begins between Hyrcanus and Aristobulus to convince the Romans who they should support. Now, again, they were invited by Aristobulus, but Hyrcanus sends an emissary and says, "Don't support my brother, support me, and to defeat my brother." And they each make their pitch to the Romans who they should support, and the Romans end up supporting Hyrcanus. Why? Because they detect, just like Antipater detected, that he's the weaker of the 2 brothers. And if they help him win, he'll be no trouble at all. So they help Hyrcanus defeat Aristobulus. Hyrcanus takes over, but they say, no. You're not going to be king anymore. We're the new bosses in town. You're going to be a vassal to us. And at that point, it's the end of the kingship of the Hasmoneans. And the Jews Israel once again becomes a vassal state to Rome now, rather than Greece, right? They made a deal with the devil. And they totally toss Hyrcanus aside. Get out of here. And they appoint Antipater as the new governor. The new governor of Judea was Antipater, the Idumean right-hand man of Hyrcanus, who egged him on all along. Come on, you could do this, because his ambition all along was that he can control Hyrcanus. And once the Romans were in power, he said, "I'm your guy." So they supported Hyrcanus, and then they threw him aside like yesterday's something, and then they appointed Antipater as governor. We now had an Idumean governor, an Edomite governor over Judea, in league with the Romans, who our sages tell us are also at least spiritual descendants of Edom, of Edom, of Esav. So that was the beginning of the end. Antipater's son, by the way, was Herod. Anyone knows who Herod was? Terrible guy. However, I think Antipater married maybe the daughter of Hyrcanus. I don't remember if it was his daughter or sister. He married a Hasmonean. And he may have been himself a convert, but it was not such a good conversion. And their son was Herod, which is why Herod was technically Jewish, because his mother was Jewish. But Herod assassinates all the Hasmoneans. Herod he kills every Hasmonean, including his own wife and children. He kills. How do you like that? Psychopath. So fine. So here Rashi says the discord that Gavra, it sort of overtook the Jewish people, was within the kings of the Hasmoneans, specifically Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. And I just told you everything about that. And here's Rashi's closing words here. Until one of them brought in the Roman Empire, Vikibel miyado hamalucha, and received from the Romans the kingship, That says one of them brought in Rome and received the kingship. But the way I told you is one brought it in and the other received the kingship. I don't want to go too much into detail, but there are differing accounts of how it happened. Was it Hyrcanus on the inside and Aristobulus on the outside? There are differing versions of the story, so I'm not sure which version Rashi is referring to, but I gave you more or less like the Josephus version. Okay. So then he says, Vanasa lo Evid. And then that Hasmonean king who brought in Rome ended up becoming the servant of the Romans. Ume'uz, yeah, here I have a little bit, just that story that I told you. Fine. Ume'uz, and from that point forward, Nafshi Samasni, my soul placed me. Remember the verse? Lo Yadati, I didn't know. Nafshi Samasni, my soul placed me. I didn't know how to keep that greatness. So I fell into the sin of baseless hatred and discord and factionalism, and I lost the kingdom. And from that point, Nafshi Samasni, my soul made me, Leos Merkavos, to become chariots, Laharkiv Olai Nedivos Shar Umos, to carry upon me the nobility of the other nations. Nafshi Samasni, my soul placed me, Markavos, as chariots, Amin Adiv, as chariots of a noble nation. My soul made me into the chariot upon which would ride the nobility of the other nations. I became subservient to them. They became my masters, and I became the vassal. So Rashi says, Ami Nadiv. Ami we would usually translate as my nation. But Rashi says this is a Yud Yisera. This is a superfluous Yud, which is a linguistic device that we find in many places, which he gives examples of, where an E sound is added on the end for like poetic benefit, but it doesn't mean anything. So it's really Amnadiv, Rashi says. Amnadiv, a noble nation. So other nobility squashed me underfoot. They stepped on me. They trampled on me. They made me their chariot to ride on my back. Nafshi Samasni, yeah, Ani Ba'atzmi Minisim Alai. What does it mean? My soul placed me. I myself, Nafshi, Nefesh could also mean like oneself. Nafshi, myself. I myself appointed them upon me. And then he quotes a verse in Jeremiah where, just quickly, Jeremiah says to the Jews, don't be surprised when the enemy comes and, he's talking about the Babylonians, when the enemy comes and defeats you, because you brought it upon yourself with your sins. So that's the idea Rashi's hearkening to here. The Nafshi Samasni. I placed myself as the chariot. I did it to myself with my own poor behavior. I caused this to happen to me. And of course, quite literally, they literally invited the Romans to come in, and making a deal with the devil, they ended up with the short end of the stick. And that brings us to the end of chapter 6, which is essentially this allusion to the sad end of the Second Temple period, although we didn't reference explicitly the destruction, but you see where it's going. This is the downfall that began with the wickedness of the Hasmonean kings, and the baseless hatred, which would ultimately bring in the Romans and lead to the Roman destruction of the Second Temple later on. Okay, so that's that. And any questions?
Thank you, Rabbi. It was great.
Yeah, amazing stuff. I know I rushed at the end, but I went over time. But I really wanted to finish up that chapter. Janice Hart says, thanks so much for your time, Rabbi Mal and Menachem. Don't forget Cliff. Janice, don't forget Cliff. Cliff is not chopped liver. Very interesting Shir. Where is everybody tonight? I thought there would be more watchers. Yeah, we typically have more people. I don't know why we have so few present tonight, but it's
Mir Hashem, no pressure, but my son and a few of his chavrusas from yeshiva will be on next week.
Oh, it'll be a party. So next week, God willing, chapter 7. Let me take this off the screen here. Janice, thank you for being with us. She says, where is Cliff hiding? I don't see him. Listen, Cliff is very modest, and he keeps his webcam off. He's,
I'm here,
this
Janice.
is, this is pay-per-view, Janice. Cliff, he'll share his Zelle information. You send him a few bucks, and he might turn his camera on.
I don't know.
By the way, Cliff, you're gonna have to dance for that, bro.
Yeah. I think it's YouTube freaks me out. I hate having my image on YouTube.
I don't blame you, by the way.
Yeah.
I told you the YouTube is full.
By the way, I would lose all my clients.
I don't mean present company accepted, but yeah, you never know who's looking at you. It's a risk I take. But I want to teach Torah, so
yeah,
doing the best I can.
It's a good thing to do. All right. Good night, everybody. Take care. Be well.
Okay. Good night, Cliff. Good night,
Thanks.
Menachem. And good night, everybody else out there. Anyone who wants to send me a message, Rabbi Rafi Mallet at gmail.com. And if you want to join the live studio next time, send me an email and I'll add you to the list. And that's it.
All right. See you later.
Love you, Rabbi Mallet.
Take care. You too, Reb Menachem. Likewise.